Thank you for being here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the conclusion of our Allendale, Missouri Sesquicentennial celebration. We believe we have something unique today as we rededicate this monument that our community erected 50 years ago. At that dedication, we asked the then Lieutenant Colonel Calvin C. Campbell to deliver the dedication address. To assist him, we had the services of Leroy Mossbarger, a veteran of the United States Navy, and Donald Moran, a veteran of the United States Army. Today, for our rededication, we have the now retired Colonel Calvin C. Campbell returning along with his same aides, Leroy Mossbarger and Donald Moran. To further honor our veterans, Colonel Campbell's brother, retired Air Force Senior Master Sergeant Alan Campbell, will assist. At the conclusion of Colonel Campbell's remarks, the Worth County Veterans Color Guard will lower our flag as Bugler David Moyer sounds tattoo. Thank you for your attention. Colonel Campbell.
Say to members of the Allendale Village Council, members of the Sesquicentennial Committee, and fellow Allendale citizens, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that nice introduction, Warren. I'm not unused to public speaking, but it's mostly to soldiers, and it's hear this, but that won't work here. I know. The mic off?
Get closer.
All right. But some people here today that remember me as a skinny kid with the holes in my shoes and seat of my pants, and I couldn't get on the second team of the basketball team. With that, I must tell you how I ended up here again. A half century ago, as a 37-year-old lieutenant colonel, as Warren said, I was sent to the Command and Staff College at Fort Leavenworth to learn how to fight the next war. So I was close here, and I was able to spend weekends with the folks who lived just over the hill, where they ran a general store right here in Bill Brown's place. Dewey Carr, the general chairman of the Centennial Committee in 1955, came one day, and he asked me if I would dedicate the monument in uniform in honor of the many servicemen from Worth County, and I was delighted to do that. And they gave me Leroy Mossbarger, as Warren said, is a Navy man, and Don Moran is an Army man. And I think Leroy had just been out sailing the high seas and cruising around, and he had gotten out, and Don had spent a winter vacation up in the Chosin Reservoir in North Korea. Is that right, Don? Well, how did I end up here 50 years later doing the same thing? I have lots of friends here at Allendale, and I do a lot of correspondence with them and phone and so forth. And they tell me that during the final Sesquicentennial Committee meetings, they were trying to decide who they would have to rededicate the monument. And someone said, how about the old guy that did it 50 years ago? And somebody else said, oh, he died a long time ago. Well, that was news to me, but, but it's an exaggeration. But I feel very much alive, and I'm very honored to be able to do this today. With that out of the way, I would like to go back to the very beginning and talk a little about Allendale's founding and the journey down through the years. Allendale has always been home to me. I haven't lived here since I was 18 years old, but I have not missed a year coming back here except those where I was out the country for the Army. It's not just the people who live in the town here. When I was growing up, it was also the people who lived in surrounding. They were Allendale-ites just as much as those inside the city limits, and I don't think many people know where they are anyway. It was our social, economic, religious, and support center. And when the end comes for most of us old-timers, we choose to go back into the two beautiful cemeteries. The Allen brothers are credited with establishing Allendale as a town in 1855, and with due modesty, they just named it after themselves. Now, I think the main benefit was to establish a post office which was a patronage job. And, whatever party was in power appointed the postmaster. And I'll let you guess who the first postmaster was. It was Bill Allen. With that, I have to plead guilty to a little patronage myself. I know that the Quad River News and the Times Tribune will have very good coverage on this, but I've imported somebody else to look into it, the ace reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, who just happens to be my grandson. Stefano, where are you? There were a lot of other people here earlier probably than Henry Lott, who gave his name to Lott's Creek and the Grove and the church. Henry was a horse thief, and they chased him out pretty quickly. There was another man named Peter Vassar, and the late Kath and Glenn Denning used to talk about him. And he was a true frontiersman. He lived with his gun, and he had 5 notches on the handle. 4 of them were red and 1 for white, the people he shot. He shot first and asked questions later. There were a lot of Native Americans here, of course, long before we are, and Lloyd Roach and a bunch of other people picked up thousands of artifacts to prove that they were here. Beginning in about 1950, there was a mass migration into Worth County, particularly from southern Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana, and people were attracted by the land, which is beautiful, but is also cheap or sometimes free. Some of these people were your ancestors, and all of them were mine came from here. Of the early arrivals, there are 3 families that stand out, and I think made the greatest contribution to the growth of Allendale. Now, I know it's dangerous to single out single individuals or families, but I live 2,000 miles away, so I'm going to do it anyway. The first was Captain Calvin Tilton, and I think many have heard of him, and the gravestone down there is the biggest in the cemetery. He was an educated New Englander, and he is a veteran of the California Gold Rush, where he may have made a little money, and a Civil War veteran. And it's no accident that I and about 10 other guys of my age have his first name. He was probably the most admired man in Worth County at his time, not just in Allendale, but in Grant City and the other towns. Well, what did he do? In addition to his fine Civil War service, he founded Allendale's first bank, and it was a beautiful brick structure that stood here where Bill Brown's place is, with limestone lintels, and the interior had tile and wrought iron, and it's just a beautiful building. But he did much more than that. He helped other people start businesses and into professions to follow along. 2 of these men were in particular, I think, stand out. One of them was Joe Hammer, who was a son of German immigrants. And the other was Andrew Jackson Carr. And Joe, they were RLDS Mormons, and Joe Hammer was married to Jack Carr's sister. Joe Hammer became the general manager of a general store that belonged to Tilton, and he eventually ended up owning it. And it ran for more than 100 years, and I saw that you live here all know who the Hammers were, and it ended up with Ortis Hammer about 1970. Jack Carr was of Scottish descent, and he's described some as a blacksmith and a good mechanic, and he and his son Edward opened Allendale's first garage, the natural succession to wagon and plow repair. Ed's son Dewey enlarged to make it one of Worth County's most successful businesses. Dewey was also the architect of the 1855 centennial, or 1955 centennial. As you all know, there's lots of cars around. You'll see them today here. There are many others who made contributions to Allendale's growth. There were teachers. We had wonderful teachers, ministers, town officials, school boards, to mention a few. But the 3 families I mentioned, in my opinion, provided Allendale's early framework, which flourished for more than 100 years. If we looked around us in 1855, you would see nothing but tall grass and some trees and a few scattered log cabins. Civilization was 75 miles away in St. Joe, and it wasn't much. The road there was just a trail, and when you got up in the morning in your cabin, you looked out the window and whatever you could shoot was a breakfast menu. The same was true for lunch and dinner. They did have some greens and native fruits, but the diet was largely meat. Broken bones, ordinary infections, and appendicitis could be fatal. These were tough, resilient people, and the life expectancy of 39 years. By 1880, there were several large frame houses began to show up around here, and businesses were built with finished lumber. And by the gay 90s, things were going great. There were clothing, furniture, jewelry were all available in the Allendale stores, and many of today's antiques that you buy around in antique shops and sales came through Hammer's store. By 1928, Allendale has many as 22 businesses. There's 2 churches, 4 fraternal orders, a bank, of course, which later burned, 3 service stations, 2 barbers, a theater, and it had an intermittent power supply. And Dewey Carr ran that. He started at about dusk, and he'd turn it out when at 9 o'clock or when he ran out of gas. The side streets were pretty well built up too, of buildings, and the surrounding countryside was full of houses, and you can see their ruins around there now. It was a thriving village, perhaps 260 people. On Saturday afternoon, they'd come here to the park, and depending on the weather, the turnout, but the little kids would roll around on the park here and play just like they do today. And the girls would all get in one cluster and the boys in another, and the boys would horse around and shove, and the girls would giggle and they'd look at each other. And then the men sat on the street out here, and they talked politics, and a few of them would go over to Purd's Saloon and have a snort of firewater. Men talked politics. And there would always be a few dog fights around here because everybody brought their dogs to town with them, and even the horse would fight once in a while. But despite these primitive conditions, it was a happy, prosperous time, but for me and I think for the people my age. Money seemed plentiful. They had traveling shows came here. There was a theater. Allendale had its own jazz band. Nobody danced, but they had a jazz band. It was made up of Dick Warner, Aubrey and Zine Hammer, Park Robinson, and the leader was Arnold Hammer, Cad Hammer's son, who was a superb pianist and the band leader. It was a roaring 20s, and boy did it roar. Then beginning in 1929, a series of disasters struck, and they were biblical proportions. First, the stock market collapsed. Now that didn't seem to mean much to anything, but it had a domino effect, and pretty soon there was no money. You couldn't borrow money, and the Farmers Bank failed here, and it's wiped out everybody's savings. And the farms were beginning to be repossessed in large numbers. The owners couldn't pay their mortgages. Farm prices, I can remember corn at 9 cents a bushel, and it cost 6 cents to shuck it, and the farmers just left it in the field or burned it for fuel. It was cheaper than coal. Now, along on top of that came a 4-year drought. The crops would rise about so high and then turn brown and die, and if that didn't get them, the chinch bugs and the grasshoppers did. The grasshoppers ate the leaves off the trees here in the park and tried to put it out, but they couldn't do it. And then a wind came up and it burnt the whole west side of the square, just leveled it, and it scorched everything on the other side, and it took out Tilton's wonderful big bank. But probably the biggest upheaval for the 30s was unemployment, and that was caused partly by mechanization. You know, in the old days, if you're thrashing wheat or oats, it took about 20 guys to run the separator and the binder and all that, and now one guy on a combine can do it, and that's what happened then. So unemployment was high. And finally World War II came along, and it moved all of us in the 18 to 40 year range. Most of us never came back except to visit because there wasn't anything for us to do, and a number of us learned new skills in the military and through education and the GI Bill. And of course, sadly, there was several of us who did not come back at all, and they're in the cemeteries in Europe and the Far East. But after World War II, Allendale's spirit began to reassert itself. And business and farmers adjusted to the new realities, and with its 100th birthday coming in 1955, things were going pretty well. And in 1954, they, like you have done here, they organized the Sesquicentennial, and it was a huge success. Under the leadership of Dewey Carr, the committee got almost all of northwest Missouri involved, and 28,000 people are supposed to have shown up in those 3 days, and I remember it paralyzed all the traffic throughout the county here. I think Dewey and his helpers were as surprised as anybody else at what they'd done. In the 50 years since, Allendale has gotten smaller, but the wonderful spirit and caring and being a good neighbor that is almost totally foreign in the urban areas where I come from is still here just as strong as ever. And I see when somebody's place blows down, people comes in and helps, and it's just wonderful. And I look around me here, and there's noise and air pollution that's now so common in the urban areas is just not here. It's wonderful. With these observations, on the behalf of the citizens of the village of Allendale, the Sesquicentennial Committee, which has done a superb job on this celebration, and to the citizens of Allendale and friends of Allendale and those wonderful people who came before us, it is a distinct honor and privilege to rededicate this beautiful centennial monument. And I can think of no better way than to repeat the words that I used 50 years ago, written by the late Lester Lutz, and it goes like this. The monolith will mean most of those who will be citizens of Allendale in the next century. May they feel a respect for what we are and what have done, yet see clearly our failings, as is natural of sons and daughters. We feel no fear that they will not far outstrip us. Finally, this shaft shall serve as a measure of the swift passage of these days and years. We hope it will remind those who come after us that they are the daily architects of history for the next 100 years. As they pass this way, keep alive the warmth of Allendale as they fulfill their greater destiny. In the words of Lester Lutz. And from this old soldier, thank you for the honor you have bestowed on me for participation in this, and may the Almighty continue to protect and preserve the United States of America and this delightful little village which is so much a part of it and which has meant so much to so many of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Camel. This monument that we rededicate today, I think we should say something about it, because long after all of us are gone, and I know some of us will be here 50 years from now when they celebrate 200 years, but this piece of granite will be here long after that. The Amy Granite Company, or the Grant City Granite Company, with Ed Amy running it, brought this monument here 50 years ago. His son Melvis worked on it, his brother Dell worked on it, and Melvis helped to set it. To rededicate it, the community of Allendale had two of Ed's grandsons, Mark and Malcolm Amy, come down and make an inscription. 50 years ago, they closed the street off, and Colonel Camel stood there and faced the street as he made his address, and you could see the front of the monument. Today, we urge you to look at it as you go out, because the addition that the community has made, we think is significant, and we ask you to look at that. Our veterans will now lower the flag, and as we believe the custom is, we're going to lower the flag as David Moyer Sound's tattoo, and then we're going to immediately raise it again to start the next 50 years of Allendale's history. You and Alan. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our chairman, Jerry Ashby, and his wife, Julia, I'm Warren Combs, thanking you for your participation. Jerry Cook and Leroy Mossbarger will now unveil our monument. The new inscription is on the far side at the bottom. Please note it as you go out, and thank you again.